I was in Devil's Lake yesterday, approximately 3 o'clock. As part of my job, we work with what is called NAGPRO, which is, of course, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And we got a call last week. Devil's Lake Regional Airport is expanding their runway. And during the course of their construction, they were shaving down a hillside and they uncovered a gravesite. And for those of you who are Hidatsa, you will know that Graham's Island, or that Earth Lodge villager, was one of the places where our ancestors had lived. And it turns out that this burial was approximately 800 years old. And it was a woman along with a child. And about the time that we were praying and apologizing to that individual and her child for having been disturbed, I get a phone call from my nephew to come and speak. And of course I said yes, I would be humbled to speak before you all. I am humbled and chagrined at being designated the keynote speaker, because there are far many of you who are more accomplished and more educated than I am. I am just an Indian boy from the reservation, I call myself, although with 21, 22-year-old grandchildren, I don't suppose I can call myself a boy anymore. I would also like to thank our former tribal chairman, Alice Spotted Bear, here for the talk she gave. There are many things that this lady has accomplished. There are many things that have been done during her administration that we should be aware of. And so I would encourage you to speak with Alice. Alice is one of our treasures here too, just as our elders here. You are all treasures out there. You are the storehouse, you are the wealth of our knowledge. Before I move on here, I suppose I should introduce myself. I always say these are my credentials. My Arikara name. My grandma Fanny gave me, and my grandma, as for those of you who are Arikara, you know that your grandmas can tease you and say different things to you of a risque nature. And my grandma Fanny told me how to say my name in Arikara, and for all I know, maybe my grandma is playing a trick on me, and maybe she gave me the words that are wrong. But in Arikara, I've been told my name is Gudjidagawat, which means bear charging from the woods. My credentials. My Hidatsa name is Ipedash, or Ipedash. I was given that name by Joe Blackbear, old man Joe Blackbear, and my father tells me that name is what he calls Old Hidatsa. It is the 2 center feathers of an eagle's tail. And I am lucky enough to also have a Mandan name. My father was Hidatsa, my mother was Arikara and Mandan, and in English, my Mandan name translates out to Buffalo Heart. I apologize. I have forgotten how to pronounce it. My Uncle Edwin, I apologize to him for forgetting my name. I am a member. My father tells me I am one of the last, if not the last, surviving member of he called the Old Antelope Society, the Old Elbowwoods Antelope Society. He says there were 3 societies that were considered the Elbowwood or Antelope Society, and that the one here we have at Little Trout is, of course, the one that is most viable and still thriving. When I pass on, that society, my father tells me, will die. I am the last one of it. I will tell you a little bit about what I do. My nephew and the other speakers here have spoke of tourism, of bringing in people to see us, because as we see here, we are still here. We are still here. Despite 500 years of overt and covert genocide, we are still here. And in 500 years, we will still be here. Whether this nation is here or not, that's up to them. But we know that we will be here yet. We will still be building our earth lodges. We will still be performing our ceremonies. We will still be performing our dances here. As I alluded to earlier, I work for what is called the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. The name itself is a misnomer in that we, like tourism, we do not work with preservation of language, of culture and such. We work primarily with what is called NAGPRA and the National Historic Preservation Act. What we do is, if there are repatriations, as we all know, that during the 1930s and the 1940s, there were many of our villages that were excavated and were studied by various anthropologists. And what they did, among other things, was they took the people that they excavated. They came and they would find burials and they would take them, and I'm sure that they were all very interested in learning about our ways and such. So all of our remains were taken to different museums and such. And in 1999, the National Historic Preservation Act was amended to allow Indian tribes to take over the functions of what are called the State Historic Preservation Offices. They were the ones that had custody of our ancestors' remains, and it was, I will stand corrected, I'm sure it was during former Chairman Scott's administration that we repatriated the many remains that were at the North Dakota State Historical Society. There were hundreds. There were boxes. I walked into the storehouse there, maybe 3 or 4 times the size of this room, and there were just shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves and boxes and boxes and boxes of the remains of our people. And the administration, Ellis's administration, was successful in repatriating them. So all of our people were brought back and reburied here amongst our ancestors. And that is the job that we do now. As had been alluded to earlier, we are being invaded, not this time by the U.S. government or the U.S. Army, but by the U.S. interests, which are, of course, the energy division, the energy extraction oil companies and all of that. And the whole reservation I consider a sacred site, not only because our people reside here and our old people are sacred too, but way back in the day, my father used to tell me that we didn't have cemeteries or so. People would bury their dead out here and there. And now that we have the influx of the energy industry here, there is much ground disturbance going on, many pipelines, many well pads. And what we do as part of our job is we send our monitors out to determine, if possible, that there are no cultural resources, grave sites, eagle trapping pits in that area that is to be excavated. If there are, the program enters into mitigation with these oil companies to either reroute their access roads, move their well pads, whatever. You will not disturb this, because this is where our ancestors lay, and this is where something sacred happened. My father would tell me many, many years ago, and by the way, those of you who are older might remember my father, and for those of you here, there are many of your parents. People are amazed at this when I tell people. My father was 13 years old before he was a U.S. citizen, and there are many of you here whose parents can say the same thing that can be said about their fathers and mothers. People shake their head, and the non-Indian people shake their head, and they look at me and they go, "Really?" with this incredulous look, and I say, "Yeah, it was 1923 or so before the Native people were granted citizenship." Imagine that, 1923, before we were U.S. citizens. Of course, our citizenship as indigenous people and keepers of this earth goes back beyond the formation of this nation, so I suppose it was a title or something that some people rejected, and some people did reject that title. My grandfather, Old Man Coffey, my father tells me, he didn't want to, he refused to speak English, although he could understand it, but he chose to retain his old ways. And I am very lucky in that I am the product of second marriages My father was 40, almost 50 years old when I was born. And toward the end of his life, I would go down and visit my father just to check on him, make sure that he was okay. We'd sit and smoke, drink coffee in the evenings, and he would tell me stories about men he knew with names like Black Chest and Poor Thunder, Poor Wolf, all of those old-timers he knew as a boy. And he would also tell me stories of many of the things he saw, the many medicines and the ceremonies that the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara performed. I also was very lucky in that on my mother's side, I had elders such as Grandma Ella Waters, who I would visit at times, and she would tell me many stories. My Grandpa Howard, or not my Grandpa Howard, I'm sorry, my Uncle George Howard, and all of his relatives, my uncle, my Grandpa Bobby Bear. I have had the good fortune to be able to sit and speak with these gentlemen, to listen to their stories and tell me. I was speaking here, visiting just before we started here with my Uncle Dwayne over here, and we were talking about the Arikara village that was situated down in the area where Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota meet. A huge, huge village. The village was so huge that the Lakota people, the Dakota people, and those people who would war against us always maintained a scout on that village because they wanted to know when these people were going to move so they could move out of the area. I have been told by elders that prior to the smallpox epidemics, there was an unbroken line of Earth Lodge villages from present-day Omaha, Nebraska, all the way up the Missouri River to Knife River. And that whole area to the west and to the east was controlled by those of the three affiliated tribes, the Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, rather the Nuada, Hidatsa, the Sanish, Nuada, Nukhbaga, and the Sanish people. We controlled that whole area. But then, of course, as many of you are aware, smallpox epidemics hit. There was 3 major epidemics. These numbers vary, but I will always choose the high number. 30,000 Arikara, 30,000 Hidatsa, 10,000 Mandans. At the end of those series of smallpox epidemics, there was approximately 500 Hidatsa, 500 Arikara, 81 Mandans. 81 Mandans. We have our people buried all along this river, into the Black Hills, into Wyoming. Our people were great travelers. Among the Hidatsa people, you have all heard of Sacagawea. Sacagawea was captured in the area of Three Forks, Montana, the foothills of the Rockies. Our people were great travelers. The Mandan and Hidatsa used to raid up to the foothills of the Rockies, down into Kansas, into the forests of Minnesota. So we, as members of the 3 affiliated tribes, we have a great and illustrious past. A lot of those tribal members who have moved in of other nations are not aware of this, and I have a great time because I work with a lot of the people from South Dakota and Minnesota, and I can't resist poking fun at them. We all hear, I have many relatives down in South Dakota because of my grandmother's father, who was from that area. But I have lots of fun with my Sioux relatives down here, poking fun at them how it wasn't the Great Spirit who gave them the Black Hills. No, it was smallpox that gave them the Black Hills because it wiped us out and left that whole area open. And they acknowledge this. There are those spiritual leaders whom I've had the good fortune of learning from in South Dakota who acknowledge that the Mandan, they call it the Mandans, the father of all the of the Plains, Northern Plains tribes. I have heard them say that. I have heard my teachers from Pine Ridge say, we up here on this reservation have the strongest medicine there is in the Northern Plains. And I said, what is that? He said, you have that standing medicine. He called it standing medicine. Corn. Corn. Corn is not just a foodstuff. Corn is a plant that has medicinal properties. It has a spirit, and it can help you. And these people down in South Dakota, they acknowledge that. So we have a great, great past up here. Although we look around us right now and we can count on one hand those people who are speakers of the Mandan and maybe the Arikara language. The Hidatsa people are a little better in that there are a lot more who can still speak the language. And as a young man, I used to worry about things like that. I used to worry about the preservation of language and stuff. But then I would tell myself, oh well, so-and-so my own age can speak the language, he 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 can speak the language. I don't have to worry about that. Now Ron Smith is gone. Now Alex is gone. All of those guys who are my age, they're gone now. And our languages are dying. I have often heard it say that if you lose your language, you lose your culture. So I am very, very grateful to those at the college and by association, those who preserve our languages, who keep them alive for us here. Because we all know that life is so short. I tell people that just a little while ago, I was 18 years old and graduating from high school. I blinked my eyes. I was 28 years old. I blinked my eyes again. I was 38 years old. I blinked them again. Now I'm 58 years old, going on 59. Where did the years go? Where did they go? Where did they go? But with tourism, with the college, and with the elders out here, and for those of you families out there who are traditional and tradition-oriented, you guys are the ones who are the treasures. You guys are the ones that are keeping our culture and our languages alive. And I commend you, and I am humbled, and I envy you. I envy those of you who can speak the languages, because I cannot. My parents made a pact. They said, maybe we shouldn't have done that, but when my mother and my father married, they decided amongst themselves that they would not favor one language over the other, so they did not speak any languages. So therefore, I grew up as a young man, of course, learning during my errant and misspent youth. The only words I knew were the bad words, and those words for alcohol and such like that. But thankfully, I have lived beyond my wild years. There are many who have not. Many of my brothers and relatives who I look around, I can just go like this. These guys are gone, but I must be here for a reason or so. There are many who should be here in my place, I feel, but they're not. So I will do the best I can with what we do in our tribal programs. I am not a person who is comfortable speaking in front of a lot of people, although I have done that all of my life, speaking in one way or the other. Because as I had alluded to and said earlier, there are many more here who are more accomplished and more educated than I am. And those are the ones who should be up here speaking. I thank the Tourism Bureau for asking me to come and help. My mother and father have always taught me to help in any way you can. You cannot turn it down. And so I am one of those people who are just a humble. The Lakota people have a word for it. It's called Wichasha Wakan, which is, or Wichasha, Ikche Wichasha, which means just a humble man, a free wild person, a free man, a free person. Somebody who just walks the earth and who wants to become nothing more than a student and to be a student up until the day I die. As I have also had the good fortune to interact with many people of different tribes. I grew up in South Dakota. I called myself a BIA brat. My father was a member of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and when I was 5 years old, he was transferred from Whiteshield down to South Dakota, and I grew up among the people in South Dakota. I came back when I was 21, 22 years old. Actually, no, I was 18 years old when I came back, but then I would keep going back to South Dakota because that's all I knew. But when I was 28, 29, I figured, well, maybe I'd better stick around here, because when I first came back here, my family, I was a stranger in a strange land. I didn't know any of my relatives here. I didn't know any of our people's ways or customs or ceremonial ways. I didn't know any of my relatives. I could understand Lakota. I could even carry on a conversation in it if I had to. But I decided that, well, this is where your people are from. This is what you must learn. This is your genesis. And so I envy those of you who grew up here on this reservation all your lives. I envy you. You knew your grandparents, you knew all of your relatives and such, and it always seemed like I was the odd man out, a strange bird, but I have found myself here by coming back to my reservation and looking around at the earth lodges and stuff. There are many people who marvel at these earth lodges, as Ellis was talking to earlier. People would ask, how did you guys manage to get those huge, huge poles up there? I said, you don't ask me. I said, the women built them. I said, the men would help, of course. I said, but the women were the ones that primarily built the earth lodges. The women owned everything. I make jokes. I say the only thing us men owned were our clothing and our weapons. And when, back in the day, if a woman did not think that somebody like me would measure up, she would just throw my weapons and my clothes out the earth lodge door, and that was it. There was no more. You couldn't come back in. The woman owned everything. The woman was the power. And I have been taught that too. As I had said earlier, I have been fortunate to learn the ceremonial ways, not only of some of our ways up here, the Arikara, the Hidatsa, and the Mandan, but also those of the Lakota people up there, down there in South Dakota. And the women down there sure like that. They really like the fact that our women up here owned everything, and that divorce was that simple. And so I try to maintain as best a life as I can here, because I'm afraid that one day I might come home and find my weapons and my clothing laying outside in front of my house. And so I go to my dog and move over, you know. Big dog's moving in here into the doghouse. But one more thing I would like to mention here. With the influx of the oil and gas industry into our reservation, we are finding that we have many, many, many social ills, whether that be drugs, whether that be dysfunctional behavior and such. That is not because of who we are, that is because of what we have been subjected to. On the part of the larger society, we have been marginalized, we have been pushed aside, we have been put on the most undesirable tracts of land in this country, but lo and behold, what happened? Oil, coal. Suddenly now, we people are in the driver's seat. You know, we have to be very, how would I say it, we have to husband our resources very well, and we cannot lose sight of the fact that although this world is here, we cannot, as I say, put buckskins on and go live in an earth lodge down by the lake, although that would be an idyllic existence, and I would love to be able to do that, but we can't do that anymore. We have to keep one foot in modern society, but we also have to keep the other foot back in our own traditional societies. And by doing so, we will maintain the people of the three affiliated tribes. By doing so, we will retain our ceremonials and our languages for the benefit of our children and those who are to come. I cannot believe it myself. I have 15 grandchildren, 18 grandchildren, and I realize now how the passage or the handing down of knowledge is so vital and so important to all of us. I look at these gentlemen over here around this drum, and I envy these gentlemen. I never learned to sing. I always wanted to, but I was always one of those kind of a persons who was afraid everybody was looking at me when I was going to sing, or my voice would crack, or I would say the wrong thing or something and insult the whole crowd. But I envy these gentlemen here who can sing, who can perform the songs, who still have that knowledge. And I am sure that a lot of you can still speak Hidatsa and or Arikara. And so I am humbled to be in their company and in the company of you and of course our chairman and my nephew and all of these young people who have done all of this good work and who maintain all of this good work. I would like to come back maybe in 150, 200 years and see these earth lodges still here while everything else out there is madness, Babylon. I call it Babylon, all of that off the reservation. But I am beginning to lose my train of thought. I appreciate everything that has been given to me here by my ancestors and by all of you, my relatives. We are all collectively a group, that nurtures and sustains each other. And we will continue to nurture and sustain each other, not only for the next 500 years, but for the next 1,000 years. So thank you very much. Gee, thank you and goodbye. Mazagerad, Goshtet.